So there's a version of this critique of the sort of limits of the academic class that comes from folks like Catherine Liu and Adolph Reed, who talk a lot about the professional managerial class and the fact that they simply don't share the same economic context of the people that they're ostensibly advocating on behalf of as Marxist academics or what have you, makes their focus often disproportionately on elite concerns, things that are not as kind of structurally threatening, let's say. So you get this sort of discourse that maybe birthed the woke era, where the level of discourse was about you're not allowed to touch my hair, and is tardiness a form of white supremacy? And I know what the actual substantive arguments are there, so that's not to say that there's no there, but that you get this sort of superficial discourse where we're all supposed to be very upset that a salesperson didn't try to sell Oprah a $40,000 Birkin bag, while ignoring the substantive problems, economic problems that are experienced by most Black Americans outside of a retail context or in a retail context, like not being able to rent an apartment because of racial discrimination in housing. Okay. So there's that sort of framing of this. But you are writing about something that's even deeper and more pernicious, not just sort of the natural allegiances that come from sharing a class context with elites and the wages of sort of academic privilege, even if it doesn't come with the sort of remuneration that, billionaires are not exactly hanging on yachts necessarily. Although if you're certain Harvard professors hanging out with certain pedophiles,
or MIT,
that's neither here nor there, or MIT. But you're talking about an active cultivation in some respects of people having certain kinds of ideas and infiltrating arts, culture, etc., in order to prevent more radical forms of art and expression and academic pursuits from being explored.
Yes, absolutely. I think that both of those are important factors. So there are social and economic forces that are pushing kind of from the base up, but there are also forces that are part of the overall cultural system within which ideas are produced and circulate. One of the ways in which I theoretically articulate this in the book is in terms of the military-industrial academic complex. Military, of course, signaling the US state, industrial, the capitalist ruling class, Wall Street, if you will, and then academic, the kind of broader intellectual world. Because if you study it in detail, as I have in this book, you recognize that there is no ivory tower. A place like Harvard, a place like MIT, especially the Ivy League institutions and the University of California networks, all of the elite institutions of higher education are embedded so deeply in the US power matrix, it boggles the imagination when you start to look into it. The president of the Rochester Institute of Technology was working directly with the Central Intelligence Agency and coordinating with them for faculty hires. And Herbert Marcuse, who was one of the leading luminaries of the Frankfurt School, was hired at Columbia and at Harvard while he was still he was under State Department contract at that point in time, one of their leading intellectual figures who was a specialist in communism. And the two institutes that he was hired at were actually direct U.S. national security state cutouts. What I mean by that is that the group of people that he was working with in Washington, D.C., or proximate to D.C., were simply relocated, at times like making up 80 or so percent of the teaching faculty at Harvard and at Columbia. And the Russian institutes that were established there and provided the foundational work for U.S. Sovietology were themselves set up by the U.S. national security state working directly with the presidents of these universities. Another example would be the Princeton Consultancy Group, where 4 times a year, academics would meet with the top brass of the Central Intelligence Agency, including people like Alan Dulles, the longest serving head of Central Intelligence, to work on the research necessary for national intelligence estimates. National intelligence estimates are the highest form of intelligence that inform everything that the US intelligence network does. And so once you mine down into this history, one of the things that comes to the fore is that intellectual work is not independent of power and the forces of imperialism. It is very deeply entwined with it. And so one of the tasks in this work, and work that is comparable to my own, is to bring to the fore the kind of power matrix driving ideas, so that we no longer assume that, well, ideas just operate in a free marketplace and those that are the most prominent happen to be the ones that most people like. That's not how ideas circulate in a capitalist world. Instead, there is a very controlled market, and there are institutional forces that sculpt already the producers of those ideas and then have an inordinate amount of power over what ideas are produced, which ones are circulated, which ones are promoted. And they've set up what Frank Wisner of the CIA referred to as the mighty Wurlitzer. It's a kind of jukebox where from CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, he could press a button and have any story that he wanted play around the world in all of the press assets of the agency. And that is an incredibly powerful mechanism that is alive and well, and that continues to inform public opinion in various ways. So just bringing that all to a close, I would say that a lot of what my book brings to the fore is the war of ideas and how it actually operates and what we need to understand in order to more effectively intervene in it.
Yeah, it's very difficult. I think I heard you say or write somewhere that, Ivy League institutions are like the number one recruiting ground and breeding ground for these ideas and recruiting ground for CIA favorable assets. I don't know how you want to frame it. And that seems obviously true from my experience. It seems obviously true from if you look around and look at the Wikipedia pages and backgrounds and education of the folks who are covering the news and who are the heads of these universities and who are the heads of law firms and who are the heads of Raytheon and who are Revolving Door, the secretaries of defense, and all of these things around and round and round. They're all friends. And yet the sort of public discourse as promulgated by conservatives, obviously, is that colleges are bastions of liberalism and progressivism. And they have very much been waging a war on colleges, of course, starting decades ago, or maybe not even starting decades ago, but emerging in a real way decades ago with Reagan's attack on any kind of growth of a free public education, higher education system. And sort of manifesting in this very dystopian world we have today, where both Democrats and Republicans on the whole were very antagonistic to the idea of any kind of student debt cancellation. Biden offered this, $10,000 compromise that he didn't really put his back behind. And now you can get student debt cancellation in America if you join ICE, but otherwise it's a political idea that is a non-starter, not to mention the idea of a free public education. So I do wonder what you make of the messaging that says colleges are liberal bastions that need to be attacked by the right, and the reality that they have in fact been the breeding grounds for so much right-wing influence. And also, it's worth noting, it's a way to support and fund conservative efforts. As someone who's on the left who doesn't experience any kind of institutional support whatsoever, because obviously liberal institutions also are very antagonistic to the left, I think it's worth noting that when Republicans try and fail to, let's say, run for office, or a Republican gets canceled, a journalist, let's say a right-leaning journalist gets canceled for a take, they're offered these fellowship positions, they're offered book deals from academic presses, they're offered positions advising at the Cato Institute or what have you. And there is a real effect in their being able to stay in this space and promulgate conservative political goals, work toward conservative political goals in the way that doesn't exist on the left, where, you're India Walton, you run for mayor, you fail, and you're back to kind of scraping and struggling to survive.
Those are such good points. CIA actually admitted in 1975 during the Church Committee hearings that they were working with thousands of academics at hundreds of institutions. So it's just part of the public record that the so-called ivory tower is, so closely integrated with the US national security state that it should not be surprising that so many academics advance the agendas of imperialism. And in fact, Daniel Golden has a good book that he wrote in 2017 in which he claims that this is a direct citation, invited or not, openly or not, US intelligence today touches virtually every facet of academic life. Its influence likely equals or surpasses its previous peak in the 1950s, end quote. So this is part of, there's much more that could be said, of course, but it's part of the reality of the current academy. That being said, the academy is still a site of struggle because in principle, it's an institution that is supposed to foster knowledge. And one of the contradictions under capitalism that you see in a lot of its cultural and educational institutions is that it needs to present itself as being democratic, based on a meritocracy, open to all, and things like this, while at the same time, it's very tightly controlled from behind the scenes in a very draconian manner. And that the space opened by that contradiction between needing to appear democratic and not actually being democratic does give us some leverage. And it's important that the university is a site that says that it's interested in education. And so from a more progressive perspective, you can bring ideas into a university space. Young people are, how to put it, one of the reasons that the CIA's central site of recruitment is the university is because they want to get people when they're young, because they realize that they can be influenced, they can be brought in, et cetera. And so it's important as well not to give up on the university as an important kind of site of struggle for bringing people in. And this is one of the reasons that you have the current war on education. The Trump administration does not want an educated public because an educated public would know things like, I don't know, the elections in Venezuela, according to Jimmy Carter, of all people, are more democratic than elections in the United States. They don't want people to know that according to the largest study ever done by Waitskin and Ceresotto in 1985, I believe, mid-80s, socialism outperformed capitalism in terms of physical quality of life index, meaning that people tend to live longer, there's lower infant mortality, and people have higher literacy rates. In short, that it's better for the life of people. If young people are going to the university and they're exposed to true ideas, it can and often does have a radicalizing impact. They don't want that. They need to stultify the US population. And so the war on education, the war on journalism is in order to advance a fascist project and to make the US public increasingly ignorant of global politics, of economics, of everything, so that they can then easily accept the false narratives that are put forth to advance their agendas. And what we need to do is develop more progressive forms of political education across the board in order to counter those powerful forces that are, posited against us.
I mean, how much have you thought about what that looks like and how to do it? Because I got to tell you, when I say it resonates with my personal experience, I'm thinking of two things. One, I'm thinking about the soft power of a Chipotle burrito. And what I mean by that is, when I was in law school, you would go to events because there was free food. Yeah. And everyone had free pizza lunches. Like every club, every group would try to entice you with free pizza. But the choice events that you really wanted to go to is when they had free Chipotle, which was relatively kind of novel at the time, or Qdoba or whatever was on offer back in, the early aughts. And the Federalist Society, the conservative recruitment vehicle for Supreme Court justices and ultimately Supreme Court justices, always had the best food. And that was kind of an open joke. It's like, that's how they're going to get us all in the door. Oh, we're just going to go and grab a burrito and leave. And, many people did that. But there's also the chance that you are a less kind of principled and ideologically formed person who goes and sits and stays. And the next thing you know, you're clerking for Alito. So I saw how that was playing out. And on the other hand, I mentioned before we started recording that I had this one Marxist professor in law school who was my section leader and taught me corporate law and also torts, who radicalized me through corporate law by opening the class saying, most corporate law classes start by explaining to you that willingness to pay equals ability to pay, and this is how economics classes get off and going. But I'm going to put to you some examples. Let's say you're dying and you need health care. Certainly your willingness to pay to stay alive is infinite and your ability to pay is not. So let's talk about how the fundamental basis of, economics is a lie. And he made it clear to us that this was a relatively rare introduction to the topic and went on to debunk a lot of mythologies around cases in the public sphere, like the McDonald's, obesity case, not the obesity case, the case where the woman spilled in a cup of coffee on her lap and got third-degree burns, and the public made a mockery of it. Oh, this woman is trying to fleece McDonald's. She should have just not been so clumsy. But actually explaining the background of the case and how, no, McDonald's is saving a penny per cup by superheating their coffee. And you should not be handed coffee under any circumstances that would burn an elderly woman's groin area down to the bone. Like, that is not a temperature that coffee should be. That's not a matter of being responsible or irresponsible. That's a hazard that they're creating to earn a narrow profit. So he introduced us to this world, but we were also very conscious of the fact that this was anomalous and that most people at these so-called liberal institutions are very much being indoctrinated that this is the way the economy works. These are the rules. Assume a stapler. People are rational actors, not to mention all of the stuff about communism being bad, socialism being bad, this country's being poor, et cetera, that you alluded to earlier. So knowing that that's what we're up against, knowing how the funding structures work that we've alluded to, and knowing how a lot of this got set into place very intentionally, and I keep cutting you off before you have an opportunity to really tell the narrative history of what happened with the Frankfurt School. But I am curious, what kind of thought you've given to getting out of this.
Well, it's one of the central questions of cultural class struggle. They have all the money. They have all the power. They control all the institutions. What are you going to do about it? And if you look at what humanity has done about it, I think there's a lot to be inspired by. It's a David and Goliath struggle. That's the nature of anti-imperialism. The imperialists always have all of the money and all the power, or the overwhelming majority of it, on their side. They also have the advanced technology. They have the control of institutions. And those who are opposed to that really have always had to fight like scrappy little Davids who have to figure it out by any means necessary, working on a shoestring budget, pulling things together, improvising. You have to make up in people power and in community and in camaraderie and in mutual support what you lack in resources. And it's a difficult fight. If it wasn't so difficult, we would have won a long time ago. But it is, I think, one of the most important, because if you simply go and have your, Chipotle burrito, and then all of a sudden you're working for the American Enterprise Institute, a few years later, and you can afford a lot better than Chipotle at that point in time, then what you've done is you've taken a human life. You only have one of them on planet Earth, as far as we know, and you've given it to the corporatocracy. You've become a cog in a system. And you can very well dope yourself into thinking that you're doing something else, or just use the money and go on skiing trips and go on, yachts and whatnot. But at the end of the day, what you're doing with your human life is you're contributing to the literal social murder and ecocide of the planet. And you're doing that directly or indirectly, but you're part of and you're complicit with that. So the other thing that I would say is we do have humanity on our side. Like, the people who are struggling as the scrappy underdogs of human history are aimed at alleviating the incredible levels of death and suffering that have structured human history on planet Earth, particularly over the last 5 centuries, if we're just focused on capitalism. And they're struggling to make a world in which, people can eat and have shelter and running water and electricity. And so if you're going to do one thing with your life, instead of screwing everybody else over in order to feel, be able to drink fancy martinis or whatever you happen to be into, or for that matter, get involved in pedophilia rings and, the global sex trade and be raping 12-year-olds, or other things like our capitalist ruling class does and continues to do, along with the political and intellectual elite that's part of that complex, instead of being on the side of the kind of pedophiles of history and those who are just morally depraved and debaucherous, you could be on the side of humanity and, contribute to a struggle that really matters in any way, shape, or form. And also be inspired by those who have fought and won. A lot of people have given their lives to making the world better, and a lot of people have succeeded in making the world better. That's the last thing that I'd say, is that we can't be lulled into the defeatist narrative. There have been major changes, even in a country like this. When this country was set up as a republic, you couldn't vote for the president. You couldn't vote for the Senate. You had to pay a poll tax. You had to be a property owner. That has changed. And it's changed because of class struggle from below. It's changed due to massive human sacrifice. And it's much better to be on that side of history because, as Fidel Castro said, history will absolve us because we're on the side of humanity.
I agree with you, obviously. And
but you're still thinking about those burritos,
not being a
aren't
defeatist.
You?
No, it's not. Here's the reality. Here's what I'm thinking of. The argument about we have one human life on the planet and you don't want to use it working for the American Enterprise Institute it resonates with me. But I mean, I've seen how people also make the case that you have one life on this earth and I don't want to spend it struggling to make ends meet, living in substandard conditions. I mean, I watched a TikTok of a young woman earlier today who was talking about how she quit her job over Gaza and how she didn't really expect to not be able to get employed later, and that she's really struggling 2 years later. And she's not, regretful of the sort of moral assessment that she did at the time. She was also getting sexually harassed at work. It sounds like a really terrible work environment for a lot of reasons. But that she was dealing with the real world consequences of it being a bad job market, of there being so many institutions in her field that are dominated by Zionists, that, she's kind of hopped out of the frying pan into the fire.
I quit my job for Palestine 2 years ago and I regret it. I feel like it was one of the biggest mistakes of my life, and I feel like I have ruined my life past a point of no return. I have been unable to get back on my feet. Every door keeps slamming in my face, and it has me questioning every decision I've made in the past 2 years. I quit because I was working at a small consulting firm, and after October 2023, I found out that they were Zionists, major Zionists. I mean, the company was only like 20-something people, and it was filled with Zionists who were harassing me, who were sending emails to the entire company in support of Israel. And there were a lot of things that started to add up that made me realize that I had actually been being discriminated against by the leadership for years. And the straw that broke the camel's back was that after I made a complaint to HR about an email that was sent out to the company about the mental health of Israelis, a leader in the company went out of their way to pursue a client who had a program that supported Israelis with their mental health. And that just felt like the biggest slap in the face. I felt so unsafe at that company for other reasons as well, because I was being sexually harassed by the CEO as well, who had been inappropriate on countless occasions, all of which was reported to HR before I left, by the way. And despite all of that, that still felt like a better option than the position I'm in right now. And I don't say this to discourage people from doing things in acts of protest, but this is the reality of living in America and living under the shackles of capitalism. You have to fall in line with the system if you want to survive. Otherwise, you're screwed. I am just in the lowest point of my life, and I honestly don't know how I'm going to get out of it, because I never expected that this would go on for 2 years. especially someone like me. Like, I don't mean to brag, but I am a high achiever. Like, anyone who has known me my entire life, I've always been in the top 1% of my classes. I was fucking valedictorian. I studied neuroscience. I am one of the best employees at every company that I've worked at, and I know that. I know my value. But you can't prove that to companies, especially in an incredibly competitive job market. I just don't fucking know what to do anymore.
And I've seen, particularly among Black peers, who feel like I'm the first of my generation, first of my family to access these opportunities and this elite higher education, to earn more money than anybody's ever earned before. And don't I have an obligation to go and work at McKinsey or what have you? And how are you going to tell me that the ladder has to be pulled up the second that I got here? And I'm very cognizant of how, like, the argument to do the right thing is even harder to make, or is maybe even resisted more fulsomely from people who are from historically marginalized groups. And I have some sort of like interpersonal sympathy for that position, at the same time that it is obvious that our collective fate sort of depends on some substantial chunk of us making the choice to make a personal sacrifice so that we're all not, building drones that are ultimately going to come back on us in the imperial boomerang of it all.
Yeah. Well, you have to see yourself as part of something larger than yourself. And there is a rank individualism baked into US culture, where you're taught that what matters is you as an individual and your career or your ability to get a job, or, what you can consume and other such things. And of course, particularly when you're dealing with communities that have been subjected to extreme forms of immiseration, everybody has to survive and find ways of surviving. And at times you have to make tactical sacrifices. It's not like there's a clean job market out there, where you can work for, the perfect entity that's going to, actually be perfectly in line with your political and economic ideals. But you can, I think, deal with the complexities of that fact while also that if we want to get out of the world that we're in, if you're in a family, you're close with friends, and you want your people to have a better life, then you have to think of yourself as part of something much larger than just your individual trajectory. And that is a kind of gestalt shift. It's from individual opportunism to recognition that you're part of something larger than yourself.
Professor Rockhill, even the word opportunism, like I want to be so clear that I'm with you. But, I feel also that I'm in a privileged position, for instance, where I can get fired from my corporate newscasting job and I can still support myself with this podcast because I happen to be quote unquote famous enough that I can get a certain number of subscribers and still be able to pay my rent and my own health insurance. But that's a very privileged position that I have because I was the national press secretary for Bernie Sanders, and that I was chosen for that largely because of the pedigree that I have, not because of, my political experience per se. And that those are like stacked privileges that other people don't have. And what am I supposed to do? Tell some person who's working at Starbucks, because it is a tough job market, that they shouldn't work at Starbucks because Starbucks is an evil institution and I'm boycotting Starbucks? Is it enough that they're unionizing their Starbucks? Am I supposed to tell some Amazon delivery worker that they're evil because they're working for Bezos when I'm not the one that has to do it? Like that.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm not. Yeah, I'm with you on all of that. In the sense, I'm a university professor. I'm tenured. I have a certain small platform, so I am definitely among the privileged. There's no doubt about that. And I'm not advocating for harassing Amazon workers or anything like that. I'm for harassing Jeff Bezos and the ownership class and figuring out how people you don't choose the circumstances of your exploitation. Those are imposed upon you.
Well, what do you say to the people who went to law school and are working at some firm and the firm bent the knee to Trump? What do you say to the person who is, let's say they're a doctor and they're, feel the downward pressure to spend limited time with patients and not order that x-ray because the health insurance company told them not to. Like, where do you draw the line between, there's a big gap between the delivery worker and Jeff Bezos, obviously. But now we're in this like weird PMZ zone, which, coming back to the book, does seem to be the zone where people have a significant amount of power and influence, like these Marxist scholars and professors, and are getting a lot from the system.
Yeah.
And yet they aren't literally the titans of industry. They're not the Rockefellers who are funding their work.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that the kind of broad working class, the Amazon workers, the Uber drivers and things like this, it is in many ways easier to radicalize them or get them involved in politics because they have the lived experience of exploitation. They're the ones who are delivering packages in the rain. They're the ones who can't afford healthcare. They're the ones who are sleeping in their cars. Like, they're the ones who should clearly know we need system change because it's not working. But to get to system change, you can't do that on your own, and you just quitting your job isn't going to get us anywhere. What you have to do is work together in an organized form to change the system. And you need the political education to know how people have fought and won in the past so that you can reinvent those tools in the future. The middle layer, or the middle class, is a very different animal because you have a class that benefits from the crumbs that fall from the table of the ruling class, and that has been put in a situation in which many of them aspire to a bourgeois lifestyle. They might not have yachts, but they love to go on them, and maybe get a yacht if they could just, get certain preferments in their job or whatnot. And those who are on the left end of that spectrum, some of them will identify very clearly, and both Marx, Lenin, Engels said this very clearly. They said that for a true transformation of society, you actually do need members of this middle layer and members of the intelligentsia who align themselves on the broad working class for a system change, because they're the ones who have the leisure and time and material resources necessary to do a systemic analysis of society and develop things like a sophisticated economic, analysis of contemporary capitalism, for instance. Whereas somebody delivering Amazon packages might be able to educate themselves on the weekends, but they're kind of beaten down so much by the system that they don't have as much time and resources. But many in the middle layer who are on the left, and this brings us back to some of your references, like to the work of Adolf Reed Jr., who I think is an incredible and important figure, is that some of that middle layer will pose as leftist while actually just wanting to maintain their status as superior to the broader working class. And that's the segment of the middle class that is open to and has been, to at least some extent, bought off by the capitalist ruling class. And what they want to do is appear as leftists without actually being dedicated to a serious system change. They're the kind of compatible leftists. What's that?
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah. No, there are these compatible leftists who want the symbolic credibility of appearing on the left, while materially and economically, they want to still be above the working class. They're actually fearful of being driven down into the working class. And so that middle layer is, historically, it's very unstable, right? It can be perfectly aligned on the ruling class and work for the American Enterprise, Institute or other such organizations. It can also pose as leftist without actually wanting a system change because it might mean a change in the quality of their own life. And what I advocate for is that middle layer, and there's great examples of this, the Cuban Revolution, which is obviously in the news with the war on the Caribbean, many of the leaders of that revolution were from the middle layer. They were lawyers, they were doctors, they were trained, they were educated students. That's where some of the leaders of that movement came out of. And they decided that the most important thing was the liberation of Cuba from imperialism, more so than their law career or their doctor's career. And they also recognized you need lawyers and you need doctors under socialism. It's just that you need the lawyer of the people. You need the doctor of the people. You need people who actually care for other people, not just being a kind of cog in the insurance system and making money for themselves.
Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.